The northern fortress of Blackstone Keep was not a place where people asked questions. It stood on the edge of the wild mountains, its towers carved into dark rock, its walls scarred by centuries of war between rival wolf packs. Cold winds howled through the stone corridors, and even the bravest soldiers avoided the lower halls after sunset. But there was one place in the fortress no one spoke about at all. The lower prison. Deep beneath the keep, beyond 3 iron gates and a staircase that spiraled into darkness, something was locked away. Something dangerous. The guards had a name for it. The Cursed Wolf. No one knew where the wolf had come from. The commander claimed it had been captured during a battle with rogue packs in the northern forests. Others whispered darker stories, that it was an ancient beast, something older than the packs themselves. Whatever the truth was, one rule existed for everyone in the fortress. Never go near the chained wolf. Even the soldiers who guarded the prison avoided looking directly at the creature. They said its eyes glowed like fire. They said its growl could shake the walls. They said anyone foolish enough to step too close wouldn't live long enough to regret it. But Elena had heard something different. Elena was not a warrior. She was a servant girl, quiet, unnoticed, responsible for carrying water, cleaning the halls, and delivering food to places no one else wanted to go. That was how she first heard it. Late one evening, while bringing supplies down the prison corridor, she paused halfway down the stairs. At first she thought it was the wind. A low sound echoing through the stone tunnels. But then it came again. A long, quiet sound that made the hair on her arms rise. Not a snarl. Not a roar. A howl. But it wasn't angry. It sounded broken. Lonely. The guards standing near the prison gate noticed her hesitation. One of them laughed. "First time hearing the monster?" he said. Elena glanced toward the dark hallway beyond the gate. "What is it?" she asked softly. The guard shrugged. "Biggest wolf I've ever seen. Took 12 men to capture it." Another guard spat on the floor. "Should have killed the thing instead of chaining it. Commander says it's too valuable." Elena frowned. "Valuable?" Neither guard answered. Instead, they unlocked the gate and pushed the supply cart forward. "Just drop the food and leave," one of them said. "And don't get close." Elena nodded, but curiosity tugged at her. The prison hallway stretched ahead of her, lit by flickering torches. The deeper she walked, the colder the air became. And then she saw the chains. 4 massive iron shackles were bolted into the stone floor. Thick, ancient metal covered in strange glowing runes. The chains stretched across the room, and ended at a creature lying in the shadows. At first she couldn't see it clearly. Then the torchlight flickered. And Elena froze. The wolf was enormous. Far larger than any normal wolf. Its silver fur was tangled and stained with dried blood. Heavy iron cuffs wrapped around each of its legs, the chains pulled so tight it could barely move. For a moment she wondered if the creature was dead. Then its eyes opened. Bright golden eyes. They locked onto her instantly. Elena's breath caught in her throat. The guards had said the wolf was a monster. But monsters did not look like this. There was no rage in those eyes. Only pain. Bruises covered the creature's side. Old wounds scarred its shoulders. Someone had beaten it again recently. Her chest tightened. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The wolf didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. Instead it slowly lowered its head back onto the cold stone floor. As if it was too tired to fight anymore. Elena glanced back down the hallway. The guards were still talking near the gate, their voices echoing faintly. She looked again at the wolf. Something about the runes on the chains bothered her. She had seen those markings before in old books the fortress scribes kept. They were not ordinary restraints. They were alpha-binding chains. Chains meant to hold creatures far more powerful than ordinary wolves. Elena stepped closer. The wolf's ears twitched slightly, but it didn't move. Slowly, carefully, she knelt beside the nearest shackle. The metal was cold beneath her fingers. And the lock was rusting. She hesitated. Every story she had ever heard warned against this creature. But the longer she looked at the wolf, the more certain she felt. This wasn't a monster. This was a prisoner. Above the fortress, suddenly, war horns blared. The sound echoed through the entire mountain. The wolf's head lifted instantly. Footsteps thundered across the halls above them. Shouts filled the corridors. Elena heard a guard yell from the gate. "The gates are opening." Another voice shouted back. "The royal pack has arrived." Elena's heart skipped. There was only one reason the royal pack would travel this far north. Only one wolf powerful enough to command them. A final horn blast shook the fortress walls. Then a voice echoed through the halls. half fear, half awe. The Alpha King has arrived. And deep in the prison chamber, the chained wolf slowly stood. The moment the war horns echoed through Blackstone Keep, the entire fortress erupted into chaos. Boots thundered across the stone floors. Commanders shouted orders. Servants rushed through the halls carrying torches and banners. Only one name passed between every guard and soldier in the fortress. The Alpha King. The ruler of the northern pacts had arrived. But deep beneath the fortress, in the cold prison chamber, the noise from above sounded distant and muffled. Elena barely noticed it. Her eyes were fixed on the massive wolf now standing before her. The creature had risen slowly, the heavy chains scraping loudly across the stone floor. The runes carved into the iron shackles glowed faintly, pulsing with a dull red light. Even standing, the wolf could barely move more than a few steps. The chains were too tight. Too strong. Elena swallowed. Up close, the wolf looked even larger than she had first realized. Its shoulders were nearly as high as her chest, and its thick silver fur shimmered faintly in the torchlight. But it wasn't the wolf's size that unsettled her. It was the feeling in the air around him. Heavy. Powerful. As if the creature itself carried a storm inside it. The wolf's golden eyes watched her carefully. Not with hunger. Not with anger. But with quiet patience. As though he was waiting for her to decide something important. Elena slowly reached toward the nearest iron cuff. The metal band wrapped tightly around the wolf's front leg. Strange symbols were carved deep into the surface, old runes she had seen once in an ancient book in the fortress library. Runes meant for one purpose. To bind an alpha. Her heart began to race. Why would anyone place alpha binding chains on a prisoner? Even the strongest wolves in the northern packs could not break those restraints. They were forged centuries ago by the first pack kings, designed to imprison creatures far stronger than ordinary werewolves. Elena traced one of the symbols with her finger. The metal was worn. Rust had begun to eat away at the lock. Which meant the chains had been here a long time. "Why are you here?" she whispered. The wolf said nothing, of course. But his ears flicked slightly at the sound of her voice. Then his gaze shifted toward the corridor behind her. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway. Elena stiffened. 2 guards were approaching. She quickly stepped away from the chains just as the prison door creaked open. A tall guard stepped inside carrying a lantern. When he saw her standing near the wolf, his eyes widened. "Are you out of your mind?" he barked. Elena jumped. "I was just delivering the food," she said quickly. The guard stepped closer, his gaze snapping toward the wolf. The massive creature stood perfectly still. Watching. The guard scowled. "Stay away from it," he warned. "That beast already killed 3 soldiers when they captured it." Elena frowned. The wolf didn't look like something that had killed anyone recently. It looked exhausted. The guard kicked the iron bowl of food across the floor toward the chains. The bowl slid across the stone and stopped near the wolf's paws. But the creature didn't even look at it. "See?" the guard muttered. "Doesn't eat half the time. Probably waiting to die." He grabbed Elena's arm and pulled her toward the door. "Come on. The whole fortress is in an uproar. The Alpha King is upstairs." As they walked down the corridor, Elena glanced back over her shoulder. The wolf was still standing there. Still watching her. And for the first time, she noticed something strange. The runes on the chains had dimmed slightly. As if the magic binding them was weakening. Later that night, the fortress was quieter. The Alpha King had taken the commander's hall, and most of the soldiers had gathered near the upper courtyards to watch the royal pack. But Elena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wolf's golden gaze. Lonely. Patient. Waiting. Finally, she sat up. Her decision was already made. Carefully, she slipped out of the servant quarters and made her way back toward the lower prison halls. The torches burned low now. Most of the guards were distracted by the king's arrival. Elena carried a small bundle of tools she had borrowed from the blacksmith's workshop. Lockpicks. A small hammer. And a thin iron wedge. When she reached the prison chamber again, the wolf lifted his head immediately. His golden eyes reflected the torchlight. "You're still alive," she whispered softly. The wolf's tail moved once against the stone floor. Elena knelt beside the first shackle. Her hands trembled slightly as she examined the lock. The rust had weakened it more than she expected. Maybe, just maybe, it could be opened. She slid the lockpick carefully into the rusted mechanism. The metal scraped quietly. For a moment nothing happened. Then, click. Elena froze. The heavy iron cuff loosened. The first chain dropped onto the floor with a loud clang that echoed through the chamber. The wolf didn't move. He simply watched her. Waiting. Elena quickly moved to the second shackle. Her heart pounded in her chest. If the guards heard the chains. She pushed the thought away. Another careful twist. Another grinding sound. Then. Clank. The second cuff opened. The wolf shifted slightly, flexing his leg for the first time. The muscles beneath his fur rippled with restrained strength. Elena suddenly realized something terrifying. Even weakened. The creature beside her radiated power. More power than any wolf she had ever seen. But it was too late to stop now. She moved to the third shackle. It took longer. The rust had nearly sealed the lock shut. She hammered the wedge carefully against the metal. Once. Twice. 3 times. Finally. Crack. The third chain snapped loose. Only one shackle remained. Elena's hands trembled now. Not from fear. From the sudden realization of what she was doing. If this creature truly was as dangerous as the guards claimed. She was about to release it. The wolf lowered his head slightly, watching her with quiet intensity. Trusting her. Elena took a slow breath. Then she pushed the final lockpick into the last shackle. The mechanism resisted. She twisted harder. The metal groaned. And then. Clang. The final chain hit the floor. The runes on the shackles flickered. And died. For a moment the room was completely silent. Then the wolf slowly stood to his full height. The ground seemed to tremble beneath his weight. Without the chains holding him down, he looked even larger. Even stronger. Elena took a nervous step backward. The wolf turned his massive head toward the corridor. His ears twitched. Someone had heard the chains fall. Heavy footsteps rushed toward the prison chamber. Voices shouted. Down there. The prisoner. The wolf's golden eyes flicked back to Elena. And for the first time, a strange light flashed inside them. Not pain. Not exhaustion. Power. Because above the fortress, the gates of Blackstone Keep had just opened. And the most powerful wolf in the northern kingdoms had entered the castle. The Alpha King. The final chain struck the stone floor with a thunderous clang. For a moment, the prison chamber fell completely silent. Elena's breath came fast as she stared at the massive silver wolf standing before her. Without the chains holding him down, the creature seemed even larger than before. His shoulders rolled as he stretched his legs for the first time in what must have been months. The thick muscles beneath his silver fur moved like coiled steel finally released. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The air itself seemed heavier. Elena took a careful step backward. "What are you?" she whispered. The wolf did not answer. But his golden eyes glowed brighter now. Stronger. Alive. Then the sound of boots echoed down the prison corridor. Fast. Too fast. "Down here," a guard shouted. "They broke the chains." Another voice yelled in panic. "The prisoner is loose." Elena's heart dropped into her stomach. The guards had heard everything. The wolf's ears twitched sharply. His head turned toward the hallway. Heavy footsteps were approaching rapidly. Too many. Torches flickered against the stone walls as at least 6 soldiers rushed down the corridor toward the prison chamber. Steel swords flashed in the firelight. The first guard burst through the doorway. The moment he saw the broken chains scattered across the floor, his face went pale. "By the ancestors," he breathed. His eyes slowly lifted. And met the wolf. Standing free. For a split second, no one moved. Then the guard shouted. "Kill it." The soldiers rushed forward. But the wolf moved first. He moved so fast Elena barely saw it happen. One moment he stood beside her. The next. A blur of silver fur crossed the room. A sword flew from a guard's hands and slammed into the far wall. Another soldier was knocked flat before he even realized what had happened. The wolf didn't bite. He didn't tear. He simply disarmed them. Within seconds, every weapon clattered across the floor. The soldiers backed away in terror. "Impossible," one of them whispered. The wolf stepped between Elena and the guards. Protecting her. A deep growl rolled from his chest, low and powerful enough to make the torches tremble on the walls. But the guards were desperate. One of them raised a spear. "Monster," he yelled. The spear lunged forward. That was when something changed. The wolf suddenly went still. Completely still. A strange ripple passed through his silver fur. Then the transformation began. Elena had heard stories of wolves shifting into human form. But she had never seen it before. And nothing could have prepared her for the sight. The wolf's massive body twisted. Bones cracked loudly. Silver fur seemed to dissolve into the air like smoke. His form stretched upward. Higher. Taller. The guards stumbled backward in shock. The creature standing before them was no longer a wolf. A man now stood in the center of the prison chamber. Tall. Broad-shouldered. His long dark hair fell over his face, partially hiding glowing golden eyes that were still filled with the wild power of the wolf. Deep scars crossed his arms and chest. The marks of months in chains. But despite the wounds, there was something undeniably powerful about him. Something ancient. Something alpha. Elena stared in stunned silence. The man flexed his hands slowly, as if testing muscles that had not moved freely in a long time. Then he lifted his head. His glowing eyes locked onto the guards. A single step forward made them retreat instantly. No, one soldier whispered, his voice trembling. That can't be. Another guard shook his head in disbelief. The alpha chains, no one can break those. The man didn't respond. Instead, his gaze shifted slightly. Toward Elena. For a brief moment, the wild power in his eyes softened. Then, boom. The heavy iron doors at the end of the prison corridor burst open. A group of armored warriors stormed inside. Unlike the fortress guards, these warriors wore black armor engraved with the symbol of the royal wolf pack. Their presence alone changed the air in the chamber. They were elite fighters. The king's wolves. At their center stood a towering man with silver streaks in his dark hair and eyes that burned like molten gold. Even before he spoke, everyone in the room knew exactly who he was. The Alpha King. The ruler of every northern wolf pack. The most powerful werewolf alive. The guards immediately dropped to one knee. Your Majesty. But the Alpha King didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on the man standing beside Elena. For the first time since entering the room, the king stopped moving. Completely frozen. The two wolves stared at each other across the chamber. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. Shock. Relief. The Alpha King slowly stepped forward. His warriors parted instantly to make way for him. The prison hall fell silent. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the Alpha King lowered his head. Not in command, but in respect. My brother, he said quietly. The guards gasped. Elena's eyes widened. Brother? The man who had been chained like an animal slowly lifted his head. The faintest smile touched his lips. And suddenly, Elena understood something terrifying. The wolf she had just freed was not merely a prisoner. He was one of the most powerful wolves in the entire northern kingdom. The lost prince of the royal pack. Silence swallowed the prison chamber. No one moved. No one even breathed. Every guard, every soldier, every servant in the corridor stared at the man who had just been called the Alpha King's brother. The chained prisoner. The beast they had mocked. The monster they had beaten. The man standing in the center of the room lifted his head slowly. His golden eyes burned brighter now, no longer clouded by pain or exhaustion. Even after months in chains, the power radiating from him filled the room like a gathering storm. The Alpha King stepped closer. For a long moment, the two wolves simply looked at each other. Then the king spoke again, his voice lower this time. We searched for you everywhere. The man's lips curved slightly. And yet, he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse, you found me in chains. The words cut through the room like a blade. The Alpha King's gaze shifted. Slowly. Dangerously. Toward the fortress guards. Several of them flinched immediately. The king didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Who ordered this? The question echoed through the stone hall. No one answered. The commander of Blackstone Keep was nowhere in sight. The guards exchanged nervous glances. One of them stammered, We were told he was a rogue wolf, Your Majesty. Another quickly added, the commander said the prisoner was dangerous. That he had attacked soldiers during capture. The Alpha King's eyes darkened. Of course he did, the prince said calmly. The room turned toward him. He stretched his shoulders slowly, rolling the stiffness from his arms. 6 hunters ambushed me in the northern forests, he explained. They used silver traps and alpha-binding chains. His eyes flicked toward the guards. They never intended to capture a rogue wolf. A long pause followed. Then the prince finished the sentence. They intended to capture me. Murmurs spread through the soldiers. If the commander had knowingly imprisoned the king's brother, it wasn't treason. It was worse. The Alpha King turned to his royal warriors. Find the commander, he ordered coldly. Bring him to me. The king's wolves immediately moved. Within seconds, half the royal guards had disappeared into the fortress corridors. The remaining soldiers stood perfectly still. The king then turned back toward the prince. For the first time since entering the prison hall, His expression softened slightly. "You survived," he said. The prince shrugged lightly. "Barely." His golden eyes flicked briefly toward the broken chains scattered across the floor. Then, they shifted toward Elena. She stood near the wall, suddenly very aware that everyone in the chamber had forgotten she existed. Until now. The prince walked slowly toward her. Every guard instinctively stepped aside to let him pass. He stopped a few feet away. Up close, he was even taller than she expected. And the power surrounding him felt almost overwhelming. Yet his voice was surprisingly gentle. "You broke the chains." Elena swallowed nervously. I just opened the locks." The prince shook his head slightly. "No." His glowing eyes met hers. "You chose to free me." The Alpha King stepped forward then. His presence alone commanded the entire room. His gaze moved carefully over Elena. Not with suspicion. With interest. "Your name?" he asked. "Elena," she answered quietly. The king nodded once. Then he did something that made every soldier in the chamber go completely still. He leaned slightly closer to her. Taking a slow breath. Testing her scent. Wolves did not do this lightly. Recognition flickered across his eyes. Something ancient. Something instinctive. The prince noticed the change immediately. A faint grin appeared on his face. "Well," he said softly. "That explains it." Elena blinked in confusion. "Explains what?" But the prince didn't answer. The Alpha King straightened slowly. Then he turned toward the entire room. His voice echoed through the prison hall like thunder. "This girl broke chains forged to hold an alpha." Every soldier listened carefully. "She freed the heir of the royal pack." Another pause followed. Then the king spoke the words that changed Elena's life forever. "From this moment forward, Elena is under the protection of the royal pack." The guards nodded quickly. None of them would dare challenge that decree. But the Alpha King wasn't finished. His golden eyes returned to Elena. And the next word stunned everyone in the room. "She belongs to the Alpha King." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Even the fortress guards stared in shock. Because every wolf in the northern kingdoms understood what those words meant. It was not ownership. It was not command. It was something far older. Far more powerful. A claim. And claims made by an Alpha King were never spoken lightly. The prison hall remained silent long after the Alpha King's words echoed through the chamber. No one dared speak. The guards stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Just hours earlier she had been nothing more than a quiet servant girl who carried water buckets and scrubbed the stone floors of Blackstone Keep. Now she stood beside the two most powerful wolves in the northern kingdoms. And the Alpha King had just claimed her protection. Across the room, the prince leaned casually against the stone wall, watching the stunned faces of the soldiers. A small, amused smile crossed his lips. "Well," he said quietly, "this fortress just became much more interesting." Elena's mind struggled to catch up with everything happening around her. She looked from the broken chains on the floor to the towering Alpha King standing before her. "I didn't know who he was," she said softly. "I only knew he didn't deserve to be chained like that." The Alpha King studied her for a long moment. Most humans trembled in his presence. Most wolves avoided meeting his gaze. But Elena stood there with quiet honesty, even though she clearly had no idea how powerful the wolves around her truly were. Finally, the king nodded slightly. "Exactly." Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Moments later, several of the king's wolves returned. Between them they dragged a struggling man in armor. The commander of Blackstone Keep. His face was pale with terror. "Your Majesty," he cried desperately. "There must be some misunderstanding." The Alpha King did not move. The prince slowly stepped away from the wall. His golden eyes burned with quiet fury. "You told your soldiers I was a rogue wolf," the prince said calmly. The commander shook his head rapidly. "You attacked our hunters." "They ambushed me," the prince replied. "And they carried chains designed specifically to hold a royal alpha." The commander's face drained of color. Everyone in the chamber now understood the truth. This had never been a simple capture. It had been a planned betrayal. The Alpha King spoke only one sentence. "Take him." The royal guards dragged the commander away immediately. His desperate protests faded into the distance. The moment he disappeared, the tension in the room seemed to ease. The prince rolled his shoulders again, stretching muscles that had been restrained for far too long. Then he glanced toward Elena. "You realize," he said with a small grin, "most people would have run the moment they saw a chained wolf." Elena shrugged slightly. "You didn't look dangerous." The prince laughed quietly. Oh, I'm very dangerous. The Alpha King stepped forward again. Moonlight now streamed down the prison corridor from the open gates above, casting pale silver light across the stone floor. The king extended his hand toward Elena. Come, he said. She hesitated. Where? Out of the prison. His voice softened slightly. You've spent enough time down here. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. The moment their fingers touched, a strange warmth spread through her chest. A feeling she couldn't explain. The Alpha King led her up the stone staircase toward the upper courtyard. Behind them, the prince followed. When they stepped outside, the night air was cool and clear. The moon hung high above the fortress towers. Hundreds of wolves and soldiers stood in the courtyard, watching in silence. Whispers spread through the crowd as they saw the prince walking freely beside the king. The lost royal had returned. But many of them were staring at Helena, the human girl walking beside the Alpha King. The king stopped in the center of the courtyard. He turned to face the gathered wolves. This fortress betrayed the royal pack, he announced. Low growls rippled through the crowd. But the prince lives because of one person. His hand gently guided Elena forward. All eyes turned toward her. The king's voice carried across the courtyard. This girl broke chains meant to hold an alpha. Another murmur spread through the warriors. The prince stepped forward beside her. And she did it without fear, he added. The Alpha King looked down at Helena. For the first time since she had met him. He smiled. It was a rare expression for a ruler feared across the northern kingdoms. You saw a prisoner, he said quietly. Where everyone else saw a monster. Helena glanced at the wolves surrounding them. I just thought he looked lonely. The prince laughed again. The king's smile grew slightly wider. Then perhaps, he said, you belong among wolves after all. The courtyard fell silent. Because everyone present understood what that meant. From that night forward, Helena was no longer a servant of Blackstone Keep. She was protected by the royal pack. Claimed by the Alpha King. And remembered across the northern kingdoms as something far greater than anyone had expected. Not a warrior. Not a queen. But the girl who did the one thing no one else dared. She broke the chains of a wolf. Wolf face,